everyone, my name's Annette and welcome back to Cotto Verde. Today is a very exciting day because I am unpacking all my dahlia tubers from storage and I'm potting them up. And although I say it's very exciting, I know that I have had a lot of rot this year. We had a really damp autumn, and then a lot of the tubers were packed away when maybe they weren't dry enough, and then it got incredibly cold, much colder than we're used to here in South Buckinghamshire in the UK. And a lot of the dahlia tubers started rotting. I have been checking on them and they just weren't doing well. So what I've done to compensate for this is I've ordered some new ones. So there are some new tubers that I've also packed away. So I'm hoping that those ones have survived because they've arrived this spring. But I'm going to unpack the ones that hopefully did survive and see what they look like. And then I'm going to show you how I pot them up and what I do with them in order to give them a head start before we plant them out after our last frosts. So here in the UK, in South Buckinghamshire, I'm in a zone 8A, and that is normally, our last frosts are about, I'd say early May. So it varies somewhere between the end of April, early May. But just to be sure, I probably won't plant my dahlia tubers out into the garden, into their final positions until the middle of May. Oh, so I should mention that it's currently, I think the 10th or 11th of April. So it's the beginning of April. So I've got a good month before my dahlia tubers are going to go out in the ground. So what I do to give them a head start is I pot them up into compost and give them a water and wait for them to start shooting. And then I grow them on, like I'll keep them indoors in a warmish place, not too cold because I don't want them to rot, but I'll put them somewhere light so that when they start shooting they can photosynthesize, and I will keep them watered as soon as they start shooting. So once you've watered them once to moisten your compost, then don't water them again until you see growth, because otherwise there's nothing to take up that water and you're just going to create an environment in the pot where it's going to be too damp and your tuber could rot, because they're just starchy tubers. They're a bit like potatoes. You just don't want them sitting in really wet compost. They just won't do well. They won't like it. The other thing to check for when you're unpacking your dahlias, when you're looking for the eyes, sometimes you can see whether you've got dahlia gall at this stage too. And if you spot dahlia gall, then it's important to get rid of those dahlias. So don't contaminate any of your utensils, your snips or your secateurs with the gall, and get completely dispose of that tuber. You can burn it or put it in your garden waste. I would not put it on the compost, your garden compost, because that's just going to contaminate your garden compost even though it rots down. That's what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't add it to my compost. So I'll show you, if I spot any gall, I'll show you what it looks like. But what it'll be is a huge cluster of what looks like little eyes. So not just lots of eyes, like maybe, I don't know, 8 or 10 eyes, but like clusters of them. And you can just see that it's gone a little bit mad. Anyway, if I spot any, I will definitely show you what dahlia gall is, but that's what I'm going to check for. So I'm going to check for any rot and cut those bits off. I'm going to check for any dahlia gall, and I'm going to also see whether I can divide or split any of my old dahlia tubers that I dug up last year. If they've survived, I should be able to split some and just create more, because I lost so many. I would really like to do that. So I'll show you how I do that too. The compost that I'm using today is the one that I always use, which is the Melcourt Silvergrow peat-free compost, and I'll link that below if you want to see which one it is. I'll just put it in the description. And I really like this compost. It's peat-free, so that works for me because I want to be as environmentally conscious as I can. And I'm going to just reuse garden pots. You can use anything, but I'm just going to reuse garden pots. So the other thing I want to mention is that we packed all our dahlia tubers away into sawdust. And the sawdust has two purposes for me. So first of all, it's a good environment for us here in the UK where it's very damp to use something dry like sawdust to protect our tubers from the cold, even though it didn't necessarily work as well as it should have this year. But I'm going to stick to my guns because it's the first time that it hasn't worked brilliantly, but I like using that. But the other reason that I like using the sawdust is because we recycle the sawdust. I use it as the brown material in our compost heaps. So you know, on occasions when you're cutting a lot of green stuff back, you've got more green stuff than brown, and you really do need to have a very even distribution, like an even combination of green and brown stuff. If we've got spent shavings, we put them in a bag next to the compost heap, and then whenever we're adding loads and loads of green stuff, we just heave in a whole load of this sawdust that we've used, and that works as the brown carbon material and helps our compost to compost itself faster. I'm not an expert on compost, but that's what we do, and it seems to work really well in our compost heaps. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start unpacking my dahlias, and I'll take you through the process about how I pot them up and how I decide whether I'm going to divide them and what I'm looking for when I'm looking for rot or anything that is just not going to grow well. They could also, apart from being rotted, they could also be shriveled, so we need to pay attention to that too. If you haven't seen any of the videos where I packed my dahlias away, what I tend to do is put them into these net bags, and the reason I use the net bags is because it's easier then for me to keep everything in the same bag with a label, because I find that I tend to lose the tags for all my dahlias when I'm packing them away into sawdust, and then I rifle through them and check them during the winter. I find I dislodge the labels sometimes, and then when I'm unpacking them in the spring I don't know what the dahlia is. But this way I've got the labels inside the bags with the tubers, and I know exactly what everything is. And so what I'm going to do is take them out of the bag and show you what they look like. This is a lovely dahlia tuber, but you can see here that a couple of these are loose, and so when the neck is broken it's not particularly healthy. I mean, they may give some sustenance to the main part of the tuber where the eyes are, but actually I tend to chop these off, because what could also happen is they could rot in the ground or in the pots, because they're not particularly healthy. These bits could rot, and then your whole tuber could become susceptible. So what I do is I just take my snips, and I really like using my snips for doing this, and I just chop it off here where it's broken. That's what I do. And then these bits go in the compost. I don't keep these bits, they're absolutely useless, they don't have an eye on them. And then what I also do is make sure that each of the dangly bits of the tuber they're firm and they're not rotten. And I can see a couple more of really dangly bits on the inside, so I'm going to take these off too. So I've still got here what I consider to be an extremely healthy dahlia tuber, and now I'm going to show you how I identify the eyes and how I decide whether I'm going to split this dahlia or not. So I'm just going to blow off the sawdust from the tuber. You could get a brush to it, but that way it's a lot easier to see the eyes. And then what you're looking for, and I'm going to use something pointy like these snips. So what you're looking for is this swollen bit here that looks like it's about to start shooting, and in fact I can see another little swollen bit here. So it's really easy in the spring to see the kind of new fleshy growth. It's kind of translucent, and those are your eyes. So you're looking for these on your tuber, and if you can only see, one or two, just keep the whole tuber together. That's absolutely fine. To plant it like this, you don't have to just have the single tuber. If you wanted to just have a really small pot, you could cut this bit out. But I think the more sustenance my plant has, the better it's going to grow and the more flowers I'm going to have. So I tend to leave them whole like this. When you're checking, check underneath to make sure, because sometimes there are eyes underneath. They can be hidden all over the place. And not all dahlia tubers are the same. You probably know that already, but some of them get really tangled up. And it's hard to see things, and some of them just look like this and they're really neat and tidy. And looking at this, actually I can actually see there's another eye just here. So I've got eyes on this one and an eye here, but I'm still just going to leave it as it is like this and pot it up. So I tend to use these, I think they're 1 litre pots, no, these are 2 litre pots. I tend to use these 2 litre pots for dahlia tubers that are sort of this size, and then I sort of squish them in there like this. And you really don't need your pot to be much bigger than this. This isn't where it's going to stay. I'm not going to keep it in this through the season. It's just going to be in here whilst it's starting before I plant it out. And I'm literally just going to fill all the gaps with compost and try and make sure all the bits of tuber are underneath the compost, because that way they will stay moist and wake up. And I'm literally just filling in the gaps, making sure there's compost tucked in all around all the tubers. And it's perfectly fine to leave this bit here uncovered if it's sticking out a bit from your pot. And I slightly overfill it, leaving enough room to water it, but I know that once I water this in, the compost will settle in around all the tubers. And then the most important thing for me anyway is to label my tubers. And this one is called Vancouver. So this is my other Vancouver, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm just going to check for anything that's damaged or broken. The other thing that I chop off, I really need a bucket for all my bits. So this is all the rubbish that I'm not going to keep. So the other thing that I would do is I would chop off really little bits like that. Because they're not really any good. I mean, obviously, if you only have little bits, then, you know, you need to keep them. But if you've got some nice fat tubers like this, you don't need to keep the tiny little ones that could be likely to shrivel up or rot. And then this one here is broken, so I'm just going to chop that off there. And that one, I might leave that one on. It's still got some bits attached. Okay, so on this one I've got little raised bits here and here, and I've got some more here. And they are really tiny and it's harder to see, but those are all eyes. So I've just put it in there like that, and then I'm just going to fill it up with compost and shake it all around. And as I said, I'm going to slightly overfill it so that it settles when I water it. Can you see this one? Because it's so little, it's quite shriveled. So I'm definitely going to chop that off. I don't need that. And I don't need these tiny little broken bits here. And that one's also not very good. So this one was broken probably when we split it or when we dug it up. But actually it's fine. It's not soft and it's not rotten. So I'm just going to leave it. And I can see an eye on here. So I think I'm probably going to chop this one off because it's rattling around quite a bit, but I'm going to plant this one up like that. So I want to show you this dahlia tuber because this one it's really firm still. It's lovely, and it's a lovely looking tuber. But on closer inspection, this bit here, let me take my gloves off. This bit here where the stem is and where the eyes are is really soft, and you can see that maybe this bit wasn't dry enough when we put it into storage, and it's just rotted, and any eyes that are around here are not going to be healthy. But over here I could see here that there is an eye. So this bit, which is not as rotten, is healthy, and I'm definitely going to keep this one. So what I do is I just find a good spot, and I'm sort of thinking that, you know, if I keep this big tuber here and cut through here, that will keep the eye. And so I'm literally just going to cut through here, and then in fact you can see even better how the top has rotted a bit, but this is a really good eye. And I'm going to keep this bit. So what I'm going to do is just cut round it. So it's important to have a good tuber, and it's important to have the neck bit here, or in fact it's not as important because in fact there's not much neck on this one, but it's important to have a tuber and an eye and then a bit of this top bit. But I'm concerned because of all the rot there. So I'm literally just going to cut around it. This is where the eye is, and I'm going to cut around it and just try and save this bit of tuber and eye. And you can see that, I mean, it's just black, so it's not particularly healthy, and I may be successful or I may not be successful. It depends whether that eye is still good, but I'm going to plant this one up. This bit here, I mean, I I think that this one is too far gone and I can't really see any healthy eyes on it at all. So I'm just going to bin this bit. And that's what happens when they rot. It's very difficult to bring them back. And earlier on I said, you know, this is the top, which is where the stem was last year. And I said, don't forget to look underneath. And in fact, if I look underneath, I can see right here, this little pink thing here, that's an eye. And then this is obviously where the stem came up last year. And so don't discount tubers just because eyes are in like weird places. There's another little pink eye just there. So what I do with, you know, something like this, I'm just going to take off these scraggly bits that aren't going to be any good for anything, and just make sure that I'm keeping the good bits of tuber. A lot of people, you know, clean up all the roots, and it's not necessary to do that. It's just important to make sure. So I can see on this bit, in fact, there's a lovely little pink eye there, and there's a lovely little pink eye there. So this is a really good tuber, even though it looks a bit weird. And this is another reason why I really like splitting my dahlias in the spring, because most of them have woken up slightly and it's a lot easier to see the eyes. So if you are unsure about splitting your dahlias, then you don't have to do it when a lot of other people do it. When you're digging your dahlias, you do not have to split them. It's cold and miserable then anyway, and it's often easier to split them in the spring. Obviously people do it in the autumn because then they take up less room in storage, but I also find that splitting your dahlias in the autumn, you're exposing cut ends a lot of the time, and then it's easier for the dahlias to rot. So I like splitting mine in the spring because I can spot the eyes really easily. So even though the eyes are kind of on the bottom in this one, I'm still going to plant it this way up. In fact, dahlias are better if you plant them sideways on. So this is the little single one where I saved the eye, and I'm literally just going to plant it in a small 9 centimetre pot. So this is another one that I have my doubts about, so let's have a look and see what we can find. So I'm just going to cut off the dodgy bits. This neck here is shriveled so much that I'm just going to cut that off. That tuber won't be any good to the dahlia. And then this one here is broken, so I'm going to get rid of that. This tuber here is definitely rotting. It's black and squishy and shriveled. So I'm going to get rid of that. And in cutting the tubers off, I can see actually that even though it looks dodgy at the top, it is, you can see where it's kind of started rotting down in the middle, but it is, I think it's still viable. So I'm going to plant this up. So if you keep your tubers for a few years, they can get really big. I mean, some tubers grow more than others anyway. And when a tuber's this size, you know, you can divide it, and you can see really clearly in here that there are loads of eyes. There are eyes here and lots of eyes around here. So if I wanted to, I could just slip down the middle and have, you know, a couple of different separate tubers and grow separate plants. And all you need for one decent plant is to have, you know, one tuber, one neck and one eye, and you will have a really good plant this season. For really thick tubers, you could use like a hori-hori knife or a kitchen knife, or you could use one of these little handy knives here, and you literally just want to go down the middle and with all your might. There we go. And don't be too afraid about losing a couple of these tubers. That's absolutely fine. So long as you've still got the eyes and at least one tuber, that's absolutely fine. So you just want to cut off the one that you broke. You don't want to keep that. So anything that's broken is not going to be healthy to hang on to. And I can see there's another eye on the bottom here. So this is the top where the eyes are. And then there's another eye on the bottom here. So what I can do, and in fact there's another eye here. So what I can do is take my knife again and split it. I've got this clump here with 3 eyes and quite a few tubers, that's nice. And then I've got another clump here, and this one has got an eye in here, just there, and an eye here, and it's got a couple of tubers, so this one will be good as well. So this one hasn't got any eyes on it, so I'm just going to bin those, they're not going to come to anything. And then I've still got one really big clump here with a definite eye there. And another eye down there. So in fact I can split this again here. Okay, in fact, so this one has got 2 eyes here. That's a good one. Don't be afraid to be a bit brutal, it's absolutely fine. And you will lose the odd little tuber on it. So here, I've got an eye here. So this is also a good clump. And then this one has got 1 eye there, but it's also got a couple of loose tubers now. So I'm just going to get rid of the loose wiggly ones. This is the mother tuber, and you can tell that because it's more wrinkled and it's done its thing. So we don't need to keep the mother tuber anymore. So I'm just going to cut that off. So again, as long as I've got this 1 tuber and the eye and the neck, this is absolutely fine. This is going to grow a good dahlia plant. And it's got a couple of other tubers on it too, so that'll give it sustenance. So out of that 1 dahlia, I've got 1, 2, 3, and I have 5 little ones. When my dahlias start sprouting and putting on good growth, I start hardening them off, and I do this by carrying trays of them outside onto my patio where they sit in the sunshine or rain or wind during the day, and then I bring them back inside in the evening. And that's the hardening off process that I use for my dahlias. And I do this from quite an early stage. As soon as they've got a decent, 2 or 3 inches of leafy growth on them, I will start hardening them off. You can leave them outside all night as long as you are prepared to run out there and cover them all with a frost cloth or something to protect them if it suddenly gets frosty. And it's really easy to get excited when the weather starts warming up, and I can see that it's going to be 19 degrees centigrade next week, and that's going to be wonderful. But I also know that if we have lovely sunny days, we are also likely to have frosts, and so I don't tend to leave my dahlias out in the evenings unless I'm absolutely 100% sure we're not going to have a frost. The other thing also is to protect them from the slugs and snails, because the slugs and snails will climb up your pots and start munching on the young shoots. So that is the other reason why I bring them inside. I find it easier to carry them all inside than to have to run around in the dusk or dark looking for slugs and snails to make sure they don't chomp on my lovely dahlia dahlia shoots. Wouldn't you know it, it started to rain, so I'm going to have to go inside. But I really hope that you found this video interesting and useful, and it's really helped you to identify the eyes on your dahlias and how to split them if you want to, and how to deal with things like rot and shriveling and other diseases. And I've got loads of videos on my YouTube channel under a playlist called Dahlias if you want to catch up and see what happened in the previous years, and also how to store dahlias if you're looking for that. So do subscribe to my channel if you're interested interested in seeing any of these dahlias in the summer and how they flower and how they perform. And I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.